my work. I'm an artist, lifelong artist in Kansas City, and for the past 15 years have taught in the painting department at the Kansas City Art Institute. And before that, I taught adjunct in many of the sculpture. I taught a 3D design class in the design department. I taught it in printmaking, and it was all kind of the same process for me. I talk to students about what the students do and try to help them develop their ideas for why they want to do it. And that's what I do in my studio practice. I try to figure out what the hell I'm doing and why I want to do it. The name of this installation is and I'll use notes only because it'll keep me from talking for 2 hours. So, are you all right if I sit? If you don't mind, I'm going to sit down and look at these. This installation, this show, was formed, kind of almost fully formed over 2 years ago. And I had an installation in Kansas City that was gonna come here, in this similar work, and it was called, the name of the exhibition was called Code Practice. The first show happened, and then the pandemic happened, and Joe asked me if I wanted to do something online, and we went through the process of figuring out what that was, and I didn't want to just show images of the work online. It's not quite my nature, so we went down this path of working on an online installation with animations, stop frame animations, and they're on view in the background. We don't, since this installation has a sound component, we don't have the sound on those videos, but they're also available online from Joe's website. And that was a wonderful experience. And then I had another show in Kansas City, another body of work in between. So Code Practice as an idea for this work, still a good umbrella, but it didn't mean the same thing it meant 2 years ago. The work wasn't the same thing. I am a believer that the work that cannot exist, its meaning cannot exist separate from its context, and the context really has shifted in the last couple of years. So it was nice to kind of merge several different bodies of work together that had relationships to each other and retitled the whole thing Crossing the Signals. There are 2 modes of thinking about these signals that I want to talk about. The first is how we see the objects, and then the second is how these objects help us see the process that is underway and that spits these objects out. So first, analogy as the core of cognition is a phrase that Douglas Hofstadter coined in terms of understanding how we process information, how we perceive things. And without getting too far into that, it's the idea of looking at something and saying, what is this? And going through your mental library and saying, that's like these things over here, I know, so it must be one of those, or it must be one of these things. And it's been a way of understanding. Douglas Hofstadter has written an awful lot about it in a lot of different ways, and he's worth looking into if you're interested in such things. But basically, we understand things by what they are like. He's written about it, but this idea, to me, is very much like an idea that Richard Feynman had in a lecture that I heard on tape. He's a physicist. If you don't know who he is, if you're interested in physics, you probably know who he is. He's involved in quantum physics, and quite a brilliant person, I think. And I don't think he's still alive, actually. I think he passed away, didn't he? Yeah. So it was very much like the thing I heard of Richard Feynman 25 years ago that I used in a lecture then, and had kept notes of it from time to time. And coming up here, Kirsten and I were excited to come up here. Kirsten's been in the lake every day since we've been here. And so the lake looms large over our visit to Duluth, and Feynman's, I'm just gonna read this. And he's talking about the sea. We can just transfer Lake Superior here. It says, if we stand on the shore and look at the sea, we see the water, the waves breaking, the foam, the sloshing motion of the water, the sound, the air, the winds and the clouds, the sun and the blue sky and light. There is sand and there are rocks of various hardness and permanence, color and texture. Curiosity demands that we ask questions, that we try to put things together and try to understand this multitude of aspects as perhaps resulting from the actions of a relatively small number of elemental things and forces that acting in an infinite variety of combinations. For example, is the sand other than the rocks? That is the sand perhaps nothing but a great number of very teeny stones? Is the moon a great rock? If we understand rocks, would we also understand the sand and the moon? Is the wind a sloshing of the air analogous to the sloshing motion of the water in the sea? What common features do different movements have? What is common to different kinds of sound? How many different colors are there? And so on. In this way, we try to gradually analyze all things, to put things together which at first sight look different, with the hope that we might be able to reduce the number of different things and thereby understand them better. And that's been it's such a beautiful idea to me, and I think as we get older as humans, our storage capacity and our the amount of information that we have in our heads, the amount of categorical structures that we get more and more prolific at making analogies and understanding things in way more elaborate ways. The idea is that our cognition forms around these analogies. So as an artist, I'm depending on common understandings that we might have in different ways, common experiences. And for me, like depending on those common experiences or my understanding of what a common experience might be, is a way for you to understand who I am, what I know, what I have experienced, and how I process the world and how I perceive it. And it asks these questions of you as a viewer. And so the act of me showing the work and you looking at it is that dialogue of forming relationships and trying to understand analogies that are at play. These signals are like semaphore flags. The act of signaling, say with Morse code, or signal flags, kind of is a cousin to the use of these signals, and or the sets of relationships that come with them. These signals are like other systems and devices that we use and respond to carry specific detail in a variety of relationships. Spoken or written language is such a system. And so is semaphore signaling systems, etc. Arranging the general parts of a signaling system builds the specific meaning. And that'll maybe make a little bit more sense when I get a little further into this. But it's important to say where science and Feynman were looking to reduce reduce information to common or to fundamental principles. Maybe artists are reducing down to these fundamental principles in order to build the diversity of the world back up from them. So instead of dissecting things down to understanding them, we're using those understandings to build things with. And so I guess that I'd say these signals are like other signals, but not quite. They don't quite fit in the presumed categories. They're slippery. The speakers and the sound work that are back there have been an attempt to distort kind of the categories of like home stereos or listening to sound systems in different ways. And as a matter of fact, the fabricated speakers back there have kind of slipped back into their reference. I'm in a different part of my studio practice right now. I'm starting to kind of make speaker sets that act like speakers, which is an unusual thing for me. But all of the works in this exhibition have at their core a slippage, between the categories of painting and sculpture. And I've been working with that for 40 years. So when we say, oh, that's a painting, kind of. That's a sculpture, kind of. The intent of that is to bring about a question of the whole enterprise. Each one of those references is right. Signal flags, with other work, stop signals, highway safety signs, all of those are right. And so is the fact that these are like paintings, or these are like sculptures, and they fit into that category. But because they carry all these other references with them, if these works are art, but they also are like these other things, then it demands that we reassess what art means. That art can be like all of these other things too. And it's an attempt, from my point of view, to more fully integrate the idea of art making into the everyday. You'll see a lot of kind of everyday craft, everyday materials in the work that get to that. The second mode of thinking about this work is as a bridge from one side to the other of the analogy. It's the coding system itself. It's like a scaffold that facilitates the use of these systems and devices, and kind of the meta systems. Maybe simply telling us there is a system at use. It's the verb of this work. So that's like a thing that I've organized in my head about the division of labor of this work, separating the levels of decision making and composing in say like the studio machine, the operation. And all of these works have come from this kind of system. The painting, well, for instance, the training models here, I made stacks and stacks of the right angle joints. And that is the only component in all of these, is that right angle. There's two sizes, a 9-inch and a 7-inch, I think. 7x7 and a 9x9. And I used all the wood in my studio that I could find. There's plywood, there's fir, there's all, and I just made as many as I could. And I had a domino joiner, and I put them together, clamped them, and set them aside. And then I started gessoing them. And I gessoed them and sanded it down, and then I started painting them. And each one was its own thing. I was painting it and trying to get a surface on it that I liked, that felt right, that was interesting. And I'd set it in the stack. And I developed stacks of these things. And I had stacks of gessoed ones, I had stacks of painted ones, I had stacks of raw ones. And then I started making things out of them. At that point, they were found objects. You know, they were found pieces of right angle things with color to them that then I was trying to make some sense out of that by composing with them. Same with those, you know, I had stacks and stacks. Those pieces and the pieces back in that corner and the two on the stands are all out of the same stacks and stacks of panels. I cut plywood panels, I had cradle panels. Every time I go to the art store, I'd pick up all the 8x10 cradle panels they had and put them in the stack and keep working it. And then before long, I had enough of them that I could start trying to do things with. And so it's that division of labor that, in my mind, becomes is like the formation of a kit of parts. And that kit of parts can also be a kit of parts as ideas. It can be strategies. It can be concepts and references. It can be like a reference that I find, a semaphore reference that I find here that I want to use in another strategy with another set of materials somewhere else. You know, when I design and build speaker components with the idea that I want to do a sound installation, and once I start working on the speaker components, I start getting really interested in like, how do you make good speakers? And I start doing research, and I go down this path until I have a room full of speakers, and now I say, what do I do? I need to collect other things. I need to collect amplifiers now. I need to explore the relationship between these things. I end up exploring sound as a drawing process. And if I'm exploring sound as a drawing process, can I somehow explore drawing as a sound making process? Right? It's like, you go back to that Feynman quote, it's like, if you can understand it this way, can you understand this other thing in the same way? And if you start to understand this other thing in that way, can you understand this other thing in that way? And I just walk around the studio with it. And then I have like these small compositions, and I've got a bunch of those. And Joe says, let's have a show. And I say, what tools do I want to take to Joe's to have a show with? And I bring these tools. And this is a completely unique set of tools based on our conversations, the history of the other exhibitions that I've had. And now this is a new composition. It's a thing that that showed up in a book, Emmy Knoebel, a German painter who makes a prolific amount of paintings and relief sculptures, and then he goes and installs them, and he'll install, and then in the installation somewhere there will be a stack of paintings up against the wall in front of each other. And then over here in another corner will be all the crates that those paintings were in, stacked up in another corner. The exhibition is the new painting. He has all the paintings and they exist on their own, but the exhibition is the new organization. And that has a lot to do with what I've been doing. So deploying the kit of parts to compose out ambient sound environments, building gestural works from the other kits of parts, informed by the ambient environments, responding to subsets or small compositions and organizing larger ones. And then the idea of crossing signals comes out of this idea of confusing one kit for another, like using the wrong parts for another part, kind of a farm craft. What do I have that will work here? Because I don't need to have the right part, I just need to have a part. And that's where that's where the idea of crossing signals came from. There's a statement in the book up front that gets at that idea from another direction, and that's interesting. And there's also a book that you have, but on my website there's a link to an essay that Matt Wyckoff wrote that Joe commissioned for the original show we were going to have, and he got at some very interesting things. So there are a couple of people, or a couple of different ways. My writing, Matt Wyckoff's writing, Halcomb Miller's writing that's in the introduction of that book, that get at these ideas from different directions. And this is, you know, this conversation for me was really brought about by thinking about Lake Superior and that thing that was, and we were out there today, and after a conversation with Karen about agate, I spent most of the time looking down at the rocks. I tried to focus on the lake. That's beautiful. Look at those rocks. And, we've got a small stack of kind of some interesting rocks in the trunk of the car. But you know, at each level, I'm not looking for resolution. I'm not looking to finish something. I'm looking to find stasis. I'm looking for an idling point. It's a pause or a fermata. And I've tried to write about it a lot, but the work does it so much better. It's like I've made so much kinetic art in my life that is now a frame that I see everything in. So those pieces especially are kinetic to me. They are actively not moving, but they're pushing against the gravity that's trying to flatten them out. They are at work in stasis. And and if you think, okay, those are in stasis, those are doing something. Do other things do things too? It's like how is this hanging on the wall? What it's acting against gravity too. Every painting I've ever seen, as a matter of fact, is hanging on the wall in opposition to gravity. Wow, it's like we found something here. And I love those moments. And so, you know, if we have something that can bring about a new question, then we can walk around with that question and see if it applies anywhere else. Again, going back to the Feynman thing. We can say what forces are at play, what is holding things up, how might they be in stasis, how might they be a signal, how might they be an object, what is their role. And I think at each level, that sense of composition gives us a whole new set of possible questions. And I go back to the idea that I'm not really trying to resolve things, but trying to find that stasis. When I think about a conversation that I had with Joe in an installation, two pair of installations that I did over 20 years ago at a gallery, at his gallery in Kansas City. How many elements do you put in the room? When does it quit being, how many people had to be here that there's a crowd of people here versus a bunch of individual people? What's the threshold? How do we move from a bunch of things to one thing? And finding that threshold was something that both those installations were about, is trying to get the right amount of number of elements in the room to where it was a thing, except it wasn't, it was 7 things. Except it wasn't, it was a thing, right? And so it's been on my, these things have been on my mind for some time. And I think when I think about that, is it simply one situation or one condition? How solid or tenuous is the relationship between the parts? And I guess to me, it's like a great big moving Venn diagram that we're looking for in these relationships between things. I'm not intending to kind of remedy the situation or resolve it. I just want to set it in motion, like spinning plates. That'll do it. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer, and we'll be around for a while. So, thanks for indulging. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Jim, can I ask a question? I'd love it if you would speak a little bit about using shadows in your work and what that thought process is behind that.
It's an emergent property of working with 3 dimensions. Unless you just stay in the dark, which is also an interesting thing, just like kind of feeling around and stuff. But once you turn on a light, there's shadows, and I just can't take that for granted. It becomes an active visual element. We were talking earlier about Ruth Asala's work, and these wire sculptures that when they're installed, you see the shadows from them, and they are as fully formed and powerful as the object, and the other way around. The object is as ephemeral as the shadow is. It gives you this kind of both sides of a duality and then once you accept that, and I have earlier works with shadows where I was really determined with the shadows, and I got the shadow to line up with the thing, and now, as you know, these are like a lot more casual. And when I got here, Joe had lit these pieces, both of us knowing that they cast shadows. And he went about figuring out an interesting way for himself to light these. He tried to make that one more reductive and get more complicated, and he tried to make the strategy of the shadows of each one different. Is that right?
Yes.
And I said, you know, that's interesting, Joe. I think I probably would have tried to make the strategy consistent through the four. And he responded like, well, let's fix. It's like, no, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying it's different. I didn't use these signals, you did, right? How did he use them? And then that becomes a really interesting collaborative process where I give up a little bit of agency and get it and get a collaborative outcome from it. And there's no wrong or right. I'm not gonna argue with Joe about whether his aesthetic outcome is better than mine, or this was the experiment, and it was,
And then you've also the moving light bulbs, where shadow is.
Yeah, and I did a lot of a number of kinetic sculptures over the years, and one in the last installation I did where the light source is actually moving.
Mm-hmm.
So it's compressing and decompressing. The light sources aren't moving over here, but the object is. So it's a kind of an accordion. It just tells you how the space is operating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just bringing that up makes me want to swing these back. I saw you do that. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's find the motors, and it'll probably be happening soon.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Yeah, I like if it's really kinetic. How kinetic is it? These are all frames of reference that self-generate and help spur on the next experiment.
I really love the name of the show, and I feel these three pieces in particular make me buy into it, because their signals are crossing and they're reaching, and the kinetic properties between all four of these pieces here it's brilliant. It's really brilliant.
Oh, thank you. That makes sense. And it makes sense in this microcosm of the whole thing. But it also can make sense in the relationship between those and those. And it can also make sense as we were looking at the reflection of the yellow sign across the street in the black panel on that facing it, and what it did to those signals are crossed. That sign in this installation got crossed. It's like at every level we can test it and see if it works. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks
Well,
so
thank
much.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.